The fire consumed everything. Timber cracked and splintered overhead, raining embers that burned through wool and skin alike. Jacob Sterling ran through smoke so thick it turned the world into a gray hell, his lungs screaming for air that wasn't there. In his arms, a child clung with impossible strength, tiny fingers digging into his neck hard enough to leave marks that would last for days. The child's voice cut through the roar of flames, high and terrified, speaking words in Apache he couldn't understand. He pressed her face against his chest, trying to shield her from the sight of bodies sprawled in doorways, from the shapes that had once been people now reduced to charred fragments. His boots struck something soft, and he refused to look down, refused to acknowledge what he'd just stepped over. Behind him, soldiers fired into the darkness at shadows that might have been warriors or might have been nothing at all. Orders shouted over the chaos made no sense anymore. This wasn't supposed to be families. The intelligence report had been clear. Hostile warriors, weapons cache, staging ground for attacks against settlers. But the first structure his unit had breached held cooking pots and sleeping mats, children's toys carved from wood, an old woman who died clutching a blanket. The girl in his arms sobbed against his shoulder, her small body shaking with each breath. He burst through a gap in the burning wall and into open air, stumbling, falling to his knees but never letting go. Fresh air hit his face like a benediction. He gasped, coughed, tasted blood and ash. Her dark eyes found his in the firelight, wide and trusting in a way that made his chest tighten. She was 7 years old, maybe 8, old enough to remember this night forever, old enough to carry the weight of it for the rest of her life, just as he would. "Close your eyes, little one." The words came out raw, his throat scorched. "Don't look." She obeyed, pressing her face back against his shirt, while behind them the canyon burned and people died, and his soul cracked down the middle. Jacob woke in darkness, sheets soaked with sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs. The nightmare released him slowly, its claws reluctant to let go. He lay still, forcing his breathing to steady, counting seconds until the shaking in his hands subsided. 54 years old, and his body still betrayed him every morning with this ritual of terror. Gray light filtered through the cabin's single window, just enough to make out the shape of his sparse room. A narrow bed, a pine table with one chair, a trunk that held everything he owned. The walls were bare except for a photograph he kept meaning to take down but never did. His unit from Vietnam, 23 years ago now. Young men in jungle fatigues who thought they were invincible. Someone had drawn an X across his face in charcoal. He'd done it himself 3 years after coming home, drunk enough to believe he deserved the mark. His joints protested as he swung his legs over the side of the bed. Arthritis in both knees, legacy of too many years kneeling in wet trenches and cold desert nights. His left shoulder ached where shrapnel had lodged in 1970, fragments the Army surgeon had decided were safer left in than dug out. The scar across his jaw itched the way it always did before a storm. He stood, tested his weight, and began the morning stretches that kept him functional. Slow movements, deliberate, working warmth into muscles that had grown stiff overnight. The ritual took 20 minutes he could have spent sleeping, but sleep brought dreams and dreams brought Red Cliff Canyon, so 20 minutes seemed a fair trade. The mirror above his wash basin showed a stranger's face, deep lines bracketing a mouth that had forgotten how to smile, gray threading through hair that had once been black, eyes that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. The scar ran from his left ear to the point of his chin, a souvenir from a bar fight in Tucson the year after Red Cliff. He'd been looking for someone to kill him then. But the other man had been a poor shot with a broken bottle. The pills came next. 3 different bottles, labels worn from handling. One for pain, one for sleep he rarely achieved, one for keeping his heart from racing at sounds that reminded him of gunfire. He swallowed them dry, a talent learned in the Army when water was scarce and time was precious. Coffee required more attention. He ground the beans by hand, 10 minutes of repetitive motion that cleared his mind. The French press had been a gift from a woman whose name he'd forgotten, back when he'd still believed he might have a normal life. The ritual mattered more than the coffee itself. Heat the water to just below boiling, steep for exactly 4 minutes, press slowly to avoid bitterness. Control in a life that had spiraled beyond his grasp. The New Mexico sunrise painted Broken Mesa in shades of orange and gold, beautiful enough to make his chest ache. He'd chosen this place for its isolation, 15 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a dirt track that washed out every spring. 5 years he'd lived here, 5 years of silence, broken only by wind and the occasional coyote. 5 years of trying to become someone harmless. The photograph on the wall drew his eye again. Vietnam, 1970, Firebase Delta. He'd been 21, so sure of his purpose, so certain the intelligence officers knew what they were talking about when they sent his patrol into villages that might or might not be Viet Cong strongholds. The pattern had started there. Trust the wrong information, follow the wrong orders. Watch innocent people die while your soul learned to carry weight it was never meant to bear. He finished his coffee standing on the porch, watching hawks circle in the distance. The land stretched away in all directions, red rock and scrub brush and emptiness. A man could disappear out here. A man could work until his body gave out, sleep when exhaustion finally won, and never have to explain to anyone why his hands shook when he heard unexpected sounds. The fence line needed repair. It always needed repair. He gathered his tools with movements grown automatic. Hammer, nails, leather gloves cracked from sun and sweat. The work waited for no one, and Jacob welcomed the distraction. The morning heat built as he worked, driving sweat through his shirt until it clung to his shoulders. Each post he drove into the hard earth was a small act of defiance against time and entropy. The land wanted to reclaim everything, reduce fence posts to splinters and hopes to dust, but he wouldn't let it. Not today. His lower back protested the repetitive motion of swinging the hammer. Old injury from a fall during a scouting mission. 1972, Cambodia. The doctors had said he was lucky to walk. Lucky seemed like the wrong word for a life lived in increments of pain, but he'd learned not to argue with medical professionals. A man needs work. The thought surfaced unbidden, something his father had said before cancer took him. Not for money, not for glory. To remind himself he still has purpose. Jacob drove another nail home, testing the strength of his repair. The fence would hold another season, maybe two if the monsoons were gentle. Purpose, the word tasted bitter. What purpose did a man serve when every attempt to do right had ended in blood? He tried to be a good soldier, a good scout, someone officers could rely on to read terrain and anticipate enemy movements. And every time people had died because he trusted intelligence that turned out to be lies or mistakes or deliberate deceptions designed to serve agendas he'd never understood. Movement on the ridge caught his attention. Old instincts never truly slept, just waited for moments like this to snap awake. He set down the hammer without sound, his hand drifting to the revolver he wore even when working alone. Paranoia or wisdom, the line between them had blurred years ago. A figure descended the slope, moving with the careful deliberation of someone very old or very injured. Jacob's thumb rested on the hammer of his pistol, not drawing but ready. Out here, visitors meant trouble or worse. Chief Dakota emerged from the heat shimmer, leaning heavily on a cane carved from mesquite wood. 78 years old, Apache, one of the few people Jacob trusted enough to let approach his homestead. They'd met 4 years ago when Jacob's horse had gone lame, and Dakota had appeared with water and quiet competence, helping him walk the animal back to town. No questions about why a white man lived alone in the desert. No judgment and eyes that had seen their own share of darkness. Still punishing yourself with wug, Sterling? Jacob straightened, feeling his spine protest. It's not punishment, it's penance. Dakota reached level ground, his weathered face unreadable. There's a difference? You tell me, old man. A ghost of a smile crossed Dakota's face. Gone so quickly Jacob might have imagined it. They'd fallen into this pattern over the years, a kind of friendship built on mutual respect in the understanding that some questions didn't need answers. Dakota knew about Red Cliff. Everyone in the territory knew about Red Cliff, but he'd never asked Jacob to justify or explain. That grace meant more than Jacob could articulate. Dakota lowered himself onto a flat rock with the caution of someone whose bones had earned their brittleness. I bring news. The words carried weight that made Jacob's stomach tighten. He'd learned to read the old Apache's moods. the subtle shifts in posture that telegraphed trouble before words made it explicit. Whatever news Dakota carried, it wasn't good. A young woman, Apache, asking questions in town about you. The hammer slipped from Jacob's grip, hitting dirt with a muffled thump. His throat went dry. What kind of questions? About a man who saved a child from fire. 17 years ago, the world tilted. Jacob reached for the fence post to steady himself, his knuckles white against weathered wood. Redcliffe. The word emerged barely above a whisper, more prayer than statement. Dakota nodded once, slow and grave. She's coming here. Today, tomorrow, soon. 17 years. Jacob had convinced himself that enough time had passed, that the survivors had scattered and moved on, that no one would come looking for the scout who'd led cavalry into the canyon. He'd been wrong. The past never stayed buried, no matter how deep you dug the hole. What does she want? Dakota studied him with eyes that had watched empires rise and fall, that had seen the Apache driven from their lands and forced into reservations, that understood the particular weight of carrying history's sins. I don't know, but she's traveled far to find you. That means something. Jacob's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Revenge, justice, answers to questions he couldn't bear to face. The girl he'd carried through the flames, she'd be 24 now, 25. Old enough to have spent years planning, old enough to know exactly how much he'd cost her. How much time do I have? Dakota rose with the same careful slowness, testing his cane against the ground. Enough to decide who you want to be when she arrives. The man who runs or the man who stays. The afternoon stretched into early evening before she appeared. Jacob and Dakota sat in silence on the cabin's porch, sharing tobacco from Dakota's pipe, the old ritual of men who'd learned that some waiting required patience beyond words. She came from the east, a silhouette against the setting sun that resolved into details as she descended the ridge. Young, thin to the point of emaciation, moving with a determination that overrode obvious exhaustion. Her deerskin dress hung in tatters, torn along the neckline and hem, revealing bruises that mapped violence across her ribs and shoulders. Dirt streaked her legs. Her long black hair, woven with feathers and leather strips, clung to a face slick with sweat. Jacob stood without thinking, his soldier's assessment cataloging injuries before conscious thought caught up. 3 days minimum since she'd last eaten, probably longer. Dehydrated to the point of danger. The way she favored her left side suggested cracked ribs. Rope burns circled both wrists, deep and recent, the kind that came from struggling against restraints until skin gave way. Dakota remained seated, but his hand moved to rest on Jacob's arm, a silent counsel for patience. Wait. She stopped 10 feet from the porch, swaying slightly, and her eyes found Jacob's face. Dark eyes, Apache eyes, burning with an intensity that cut through pain and exhaustion. Recognition flared in them, instant and absolute. I know you. Her voice cracked on the words, dry from days without water. Your face is older, but your eyes. I remember your eyes. Jacob's heart hammered against his ribs. The child's face from his nightmares overlaid the woman before him, ghost and flesh occupying the same space. He'd memorized her features 17 years ago, in the seconds before he'd told her to close her eyes. The shape of her cheekbones, the set of her jaw, the way terror had made her seem smaller than she was. Who are you? My name is Ayana, daughter of Tachana of the Mescalero Apache. She paused, gathering strength for words that had traveled hundreds of miles to reach him. 17 years ago, during the Red Cliff Canyon raid, you carried a 7-year-old girl through burning timbers. You saved her life while 23 of her people died. The past crashed over Jacob like a wave, pulling him under. He was back in the canyon, flames roaring, child in his arms, her weight almost nothing, and somehow everything. The memory had teeth, and it bit deep, drawing blood from wounds he'd thought scarred over. Ayana swayed again, more pronounced this time, and Dakota moved with surprising speed for his age. He caught her before she hit the ground, his arms supporting weight she could no longer bear on her own. Child, when did you last eat? 2 days, maybe 3. Her eyes fluttered, consciousness wavering. I can't remember. Jacob found himself moving, instinct overriding the paralysis of shock. Together, he and Dakota carried her into the cabin, lowering her onto Jacob's cot with a gentleness that came from experience tending the wounded. Her breathing came shallow and quick, her pulse thready beneath Jacob's fingers when he checked it. The old soldier's training took over. He moved through his supplies with practiced efficiency. Water first, just small sips to avoid shocking her system, then strips of dried meat softened in warm broth. Dakota examined her injuries with the confidence of someone who'd set bones and tended wounds long before white doctors arrived with their instruments and certainty. Rope burns, 3, 4 days old. Beaten recently, ran hard. Jacob cleaned the wounds on her wrists with water heated over his small stove, working carefully around the raw flesh. The marks told their own story. She'd been tied tightly, probably to a post or tree, and had worked herself free through hours of effort that had cost her layers of skin. The bruises on her ribs formed a pattern consistent with kicks from booted feet. Someone had hurt her deliberately, methodically. Ayana's eyes opened as he wrapped her wrists in clean cloth. The confusion of semi-consciousness cleared, replaced by wariness. "You don't have to do this." The words came out rough, his throat tight with emotions he'd spent years learning to suppress. "I know." She tried to sit up and pain stopped her halfway. Dakota's hand on her shoulder was gentle but firm, easing her back down. "Rest first, talk later." But she shook her head, stubborn even in weakness. "I came so far. Need to tell you." Jacob pulled a chair close to the cot, his knees protesting as he sat. The lamplight caught the shadows under her eyes, the hollows in her cheeks that spoke of months of hardship, not just days. This woman had been surviving on the edge of death for longer than her current flight. "Tell me what happened. After Redcliffe, my tribe scattered." Her voice came in fragments, pausing for breath between sentences. "Some blamed me for bringing bad luck. Said I should have died in the fire with the others. Survivor's curse. I grew up alone, worked ranches, survived." The weight of those words settled over the room. Jacob had saved her life only to condemn her to exile from her own people. Another consequence he'd never anticipated. Another price paid by the innocent for his mistakes. 3 months ago, a man named Clayton Wade bought the ranch I worked. He recognized my Apache features, asked questions. Jacob's hands clenched at the name. Clayton Wade, the civilian scout who'd provided the intelligence report on Redcliffe Canyon. The man who'd sworn the canyon held hostile warriors preparing for raids. The man whose information Jacob had trusted without question because doubting intelligence meant doubting the entire chain of command. When he learned I was from Redcliffe, something changed in him. Said I was valuable. Tried to sell me to mining camps up north. The words landed like blows. Jacob forced himself to keep breathing, to stay present instead of retreating into the rage building in his chest. "Use you how? Like property, like livestock." Her eyes met his, unflinching despite the pain. "I escaped 3 nights ago, cut my bonds on a sharp rock, ran through the canyons, hid in dry creek beds during the day, so they couldn't track me in the heat. I didn't sleep, didn't stop, didn't want to die alone in the dust." Dakota moved to the small stove, preparing tea with movements that gave Ayana space to continue her story. The old Apache knew the value of silence, of letting pain find its own words. "Why come to me?" Jacob's question emerged quieter than he'd intended. "After 17 years, why find me?" "Because you were the only person who chose to save me when you could have run." She closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her like an undertow. "Everyone else, they just watched things burn. You went into the fire. I'm the one who led the soldiers there." The confession tasted like ash. "I'm the reason it burned in the first place. I know." Her eyes opened again, holding his gaze. "But you're also the reason I'm alive. You carried me out. You told me not to look. You spared me the sight of my father's body in the doorway. That matters. It doesn't erase what I did. No, nothing could, but it's why I'm here. Why I walked across the desert to find you." She paused, gathering strength for the next words. "You're the only person who tried to make a choice that night. Even if it was the wrong choice, even if it came too late. You tried. That makes you different from Clayton Wade. Different from the soldiers who just followed orders. Different from my own people who blamed a child for surviving. Dakota set tea beside the cot, steam rising in fragrant curls. The old man's face remained neutral, but Jacob caught the slight nod, a gesture of approval or understanding, or perhaps both. How many men are after you? 3 that I know of. Maybe more. Clayton leads them. Her voice dropped, fear bleeding through despite her attempts at control. He enjoys the hunt, says I'm his investment, that he's spent too much buying me to let me go. Jacob stood, pacing to the window, his mind already running through tactical considerations. 3 men minimum, possibly more. Unknown weapons and horses. They'd been tracking Ayanna for 3 days, which meant they knew the general direction she'd traveled. The question wasn't if they'd find his homestead, but when. He won't enjoy this hunt. Ayanna watched him from the cot, trying to read his expression in the lamplight. You'd fight for me even though I'm a stranger now? You're not a stranger. The words came easier than he'd expected. You're the reason I'm still alive. Confusion crossed her face. I don't understand. After that night, I thought about eating a bullet every day for a year. He kept his eyes on the darkening mesa outside, unable to face her while speaking these truths. The only thing that stopped me was knowing you'd made it out. Knowing I'd done one thing right, saved 1 life out of the 23 I'd helped destroy. So no, you're not a stranger. You're the reason I didn't pull that trigger. Silence filled the cabin, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant call of a night bird. When Ayanna spoke again, her voice was thick with tears she refused to shed. I came to marry you. The statement hung in the air, stark and vulnerable. Because I have no one else. Because you were the only person who chose to save me when everyone else ran. I chose you because I remembered your kindness. Jacob turned from the window, studying her face in the firelight. She meant it, every word, and the weight of that trust was almost more than he could bear. I don't know how to answer that yet. Don't know what this means for the life I've built in isolation. But I know one thing with certainty. What? I won't let you suffer again. Won't let anyone take you. Won't send you back into the heat. And if Clayton Wade comes looking, he'll find more than he bargained for. Ayanna's eyes closed again, but this time sleep claimed her, exhaustion finally winning the battle she'd been fighting for days. Her breathing deepened, evened out, the tension leaving her frame as her body accepted the safety Jacob had promised. Dakota gestured toward the door, and Jacob followed him outside, leaving Ayanna to rest. The stars had emerged in force, brilliant points against the black canvas of sky. They stood in silence for several minutes, 2 old men contemplating the violence that was coming. You know they'll come. Jacob nodded. Tomorrow, day after, soon. How many can you stop? Depends on how many there are. His hand rested on the revolver at his hip, familiar weight that had kept him alive through 2 wars and 17 years of trying to forget them. If it's 3, maybe I have a chance. More than that. More than that, and you need help. Jacob looked at his friend, really looked, seeing past the weathered exterior to the warrior Dakota had been before age and time had stolen his speed. You're offering? I'm too old to fight. Dakota's smile held no humor. But I know people. Apache who remember the old ways, who might help if asked properly. Why would they help me? I'm the scout from Redcliffe. Because you're the scout who's trying to make amends. Dakota placed a hand on Jacob's shoulder, the gesture carrying weight beyond physical contact. Because Ayanna, daughter of Tukchana, chose to come to you. That speaks louder than old sins. And because Clayton Wade is a name we know, a poison that's been spreading through these territories for years. Stopping him would be worth the risk. Where do we go? There's a village. Hidden in the canyons 3 days' walk from here. My people, what's left of them. We'll ask for sanctuary, for help, for justice. And if they say no, then we run as far and fast as 2 old men and an injured woman can run, and we pray it's far enough. Jacob looked back toward the cabin where Ayanna slept, vulnerable and trusting in a way that terrified him. Running meant a lifetime of looking over his shoulder, of dragging her from place to place until either Clayton caught them or old age did. Fighting meant risking everything on the hope that he could stop men who had no reason to show mercy. No more running. The decision settled over him like a weight he'd been trying to avoid for 17 years. I ran after Redcliffe, hid out here, thought I could bury the past under fence posts in isolation. But the past doesn't stay buried. This time, I face it. Dakota nodded as if he'd expected nothing else. Then we leave at first light. Pack light, weapons ready. The walk will be hard on old bones. They stood together under the stars, listening to the night sounds of the desert, each man contemplating the violence ahead and the cost that would be paid, regardless of the outcome. Jacob thought about Ayana's words, about being the man who went into the fire instead of watching it burn. Maybe that's all redemption ever was, choosing to act when inaction would be easier, choosing to stand when running would be safer, choosing to be better today than you were yesterday, even if yesterday's sins could never be erased. The first stars of dawn crept across the horizon when Dakota finally spoke again. You really would have done it, wouldn't you? Put a bullet in your head, yes. What stopped you, really? Jacob considered the question, turning it over in his mind like a smooth stone. The truth when it came, surprised him with its simplicity. The thought that she might remember me, that somewhere that little girl I carried through the fire might grow up and think, even once, that someone had tried. That even in all that darkness, one person had chosen differently. I couldn't take that away from her by dying. And now she's back. Now she's back. And this time I won't let her down. They returned to the cabin to find Ayana awake, sitting up despite the obvious pain it caused her. She'd found Jacob's spare shirt in the trunk and put it on over her torn dress, the fabric hanging loose on her thin frame. In the lamplight, she looked younger than her years, fragile and fierce in equal measure. We need to leave. Her voice was steady, stronger than it had been. Clayton's men will come looking. I won't let them burn your home because of me. Jacob moved to the trunk, pulling out weapons and supplies with the efficiency of someone who'd done this too many times before. Your home burned 17 years ago because of me. Call this evening the score. That's not how it works. Maybe not. He checked the loads in his rifle, counted ammunition, assessed what they'd need for 3 days in the desert. But it's how I'm choosing to see it. You came to me for help. I'm giving it. No debts, no scores. Just one person trying to do right by another. Dakota began gathering food supplies, moving through Jacob's meager pantry with practiced hands. Dried meat, hardtack, canteens for water. Not enough for comfort, but sufficient for survival. He worked in silence, letting the younger two sort through the tangle of obligation and choice that bound them. How far is this village? Ayana stood carefully, testing her body's limits. 3 days if we move steady. Dakota tied supplies into bundles that could be carried on their backs. Longer if we're followed. And if they won't help us, then we keep moving. Find somewhere else. Somewhere Clayton Wade's money and influence don't reach. There is no such place. Ayana's voice held the bitter certainty of experience. I've run for 3 months. His reach goes everywhere. Money buys loyalty. Loyalty buys silence. Silence lets monsters thrive. Jacob strapped on his gun belt, checked the knife sheathed at the small of his back, made sure his boots were tied tight. Then we stop running and start fighting. 3 men, 5 men, 10, doesn't matter. At some point, you have to draw a line and say no further. The words hung in the air, a declaration that felt like the first honest thing he'd said in 17 years. Ayana met his eyes and something passed between them. Understanding without words. The recognition of two people who'd both learned that survival sometimes meant choosing the hardest path. They left as the sun broke over the eastern ridge, 3 figures moving through red rock canyons that had witnessed centuries of struggle and survival. Jacob took point, his scout's training reasserting itself despite the years, reading tracks in the dust and watching for movement that didn't belong. Dakota moved at the rear, slower but steady, his eyes scanning behind them for signs of pursuit. Ayana walked between them, still weak but growing stronger with each mile. Her Apache blood remembering how to move through this landscape as if born to it. The desert morning was cool, would grow hot by midday, but for now the air carried a crispness that made breathing feel like renewal. Jacob's body protested the pace, knees aching, lower back sending sharp reminders of old injuries. But he pushed through the pain with the grim determination of someone who'd learned that comfort was a luxury the dead couldn't afford. Behind them, smoke began to rise from the direction of Jacob's homestead. He didn't look back. The cabin had been a hiding place, a coffin he'd built to entomb himself while waiting for the courage to finish what he'd started after Redcliffe. Leaving it felt less like loss and more like finally accepting that isolation couldn't erase the past, couldn't absolve him of responsibility, couldn't substitute for the harder work of trying to make amends. The land stretched before them, vast and indifferent, beautiful in its cruelty. Somewhere ahead lay a village of Apache who might help or might kill him on sight. Somewhere behind, men followed who would show no mercy to any of them. And beside him, a woman he'd saved once before walked toward an uncertain future because she believed, despite all evidence to the contrary, that he might be worth saving in return. The canyon walls rose around them as they descended into the hidden places, the secret paths that only those who knew this land could navigate. Jacob followed Dakota's lead, trusting the old man's knowledge, letting go of control in a way that would have been impossible even a day earlier. Trust, he was learning, required its own kind of courage. They walked in silence through the morning, conserving energy and water, each footstep taking them further from the life Jacob had built and closer to a confrontation he'd spent 17 years avoiding. The past was no longer behind him. It walked beside him, breathed the same air, wore the face of a young woman who'd survived against impossible odds and chosen to believe that redemption was possible, even for men like him. He didn't know if she was right, didn't know if all the good intentions and belated courage in the world could balance the scales against 23 dead in a canyon that still burned in his nightmares. But he knew that trying was better than hiding, that fighting was better than running, that choosing to stand with the vulnerable instead of turning away was the closest he might ever come to deserving the grace she'd offered him. The sun climbed higher, the desert grew hot, and three people walked toward a reckoning that had been 17 years in the making, carrying with them the weight of the past and the fragile hope that the future might yet be different from the tragedies that had shaped them. The first day's walk taught Jacob that 54-year-old legs remembered distances differently than younger muscles had. By midday, his knees sent sharp protests with each step, the old shrapnel wound in his shoulder throbbing in rhythm with his pulse. He said nothing, kept his breathing steady, but Dakota's sidelong glances told him the old Apache missed nothing. They stopped when shadows grew long, finding shelter in an alcove where ancient people had once painted symbols on stone. Ayana moved to gather firewood without being asked, her movements efficient despite obvious fatigue. She'd done this before, lived rough in places where survival meant knowing how to make camp before darkness fell. Jacob watched her work, seeing echoes of the child she'd been in the determination of her movements. You've done this before. She arranged kindling in a shallow depression, using rocks to create a windbreak. Lived rough for years after Redcliffe. You learn or you die. The fire caught, small flames licking at dried mesquite. In its growing light, Jacob saw the toll the day had taken. Fresh blisters on her feet, the way she moved her left arm to avoid stressing cracked ribs, exhaustion settling into her bones now that forward motion had ceased. Your father would be proud. You survived. Ayana paused, her hands still on the firewood. Would he? I'm the last of his line. No children, no husband. His bloodline ends with me. You're 25. Plenty of time. Is there? She met his gaze across the flames. I feel used up. Old. The word struck something in Jacob's chest, recognition of a sentiment he knew too well. I'm 54. I know what old feels like. You're not old. You're tired. Different thing. Dakota settled himself against the alcove wall with slow care, his joints audibly protesting. The old man pulled dried meat from their supplies, dividing it into equal portions with the precision of someone who'd survived lean times by measuring fairly. Let me tell you about your father, child. Ayana looked up, hunger for this story written plainly on her face. Jacob stayed quiet, understanding that some teachings required witness more than participation. Tachana was young when I knew him best, maybe 20 summers. Strong, brave in the way young men are when they haven't yet learned fear. The other warriors wanted him to join their raids against the settlers moving into our territories. Your father refused. Because he said growing corn feeds more people than making war. Dakota's voice carried the weight of memory, of watching history unfold and learning its lessons too late. The others called him coward. He didn't care. He planted his fields, tended his crops, shared his harvest with anyone who needed it. Apache, Mexican, even white settlers who came respectfully. Tears tracked down Ayana's face, catching firelight. I barely remember him. Just pieces. His laugh, the way he sang while working, the feel of his hand on my head. Dakota leaned forward, his weathered face gentle. Then I'll help you remember. That's what elders do. Carry the stories so the young don't lose themselves. They ate in silence after that, each person wrapped in their own thoughts. Jacob found his mind drifting to his own father, a stern man who'd taught him to hunt and track, who'd told him the army would make him into someone worth respecting. His father had been dead 12 years now, never knowing what his son had become, never learning that all those skills passed down had been used to lead soldiers to a massacre. The night cold crept in once the fire died to embers. They'd brought no bedrolls, traveling too light for comfort, so they huddled close to the coals and tried to steal warmth from proximity. Jacob took first watch, his rifle across his knees, scanning the darkness for movement that would signal pursuit. Ayana's breathing deepened into sleep. Dakota remained awake beside him, two old men keeping vigil while the young rested. You think they're following? Jacob considered the question, running tactical calculations honed by decades of experience. If Clayton's smart, he sent riders out as soon as he realized she'd reached me. They'll find the homestead by tomorrow, see we've left, pick up our trail. 2 days behind us, maybe less if they push hard. Can we lose them? In this terrain? With you and her both moving slower than healthy men? Dakota's assessment was pragmatic, free of judgment. No, best we can hope is to reach the village before they catch us. After that, numbers might even the odds. Might. Jacob shifted his weight, trying to ease the ache in his lower back. I've fought worse odds and lived. Doesn't mean I enjoyed it. The second day brought heat that shimmered off rocks and turned the air thick enough to taste. They rationed water carefully. Each person allowed 3 swallows at midday and again at dusk. Jacob's throat felt lined with sand, his lips cracking despite the balm Dakota shared from a tin worn smooth with age. Ayana stumbled twice before noon, caught each time by Dakota's surprising quickness. The old man seemed to sense her limits better than she did herself, calling rest before her body demanded them, offering jerky, softened, and precious water when her hands shook too much to chew properly. We can slow down. Jacob hated the words even as he spoke them, knowing speed meant survival, but unable to watch her suffer without offering respite. No. Her voice carried steel wrapped in velvet. They're following. We keep moving. Stubborn runs in Apache families, apparently. The ghost of a smile crossed her face. My grandmother once walked 50 miles with a broken leg rather than admit weakness to soldiers who'd captured her. Stubbornness kept her alive long enough to escape. What happened to her? She lived another 40 years, died in her sleep surrounded by family. Ayana's expression shifted, memory mixing with present awareness. She told me once that survival isn't about being strong. It's about being too stubborn to quit. Sounds like someone else I know. They walked through afternoon heat that sucked moisture from their bodies faster than they could replace it. Jacob felt his age in every step. The accumulation of old injuries and hard years pressing down on joints that had forgotten how to move without pain. But Ayana kept going and Dakota kept going, so Jacob kept going because stopping meant surrender, and he'd surrendered enough for one lifetime. Evening brought them to a narrow canyon where water seeped from cracks in stone, pooling in shallow depressions. They filled their canteens, drank their fill, and made camp beneath an overhang that would hide their fire from distant observers. Dakota checked Ayana's injuries while Jacob prepared a sparse meal. The rope burns on her wrists were healing cleanly, the bruises on her ribs fading from purple to yellow-green. She'd live, would carry scars but not permanent damage. You're stronger than you look. Ayana accepted the compliment with a small nod. Had to be. The alternative was dying, and I wasn't ready for that. What changed? 3 months running from Clayton? Why come to me now instead of heading for Mexico or California? She turned her wrists over, studying the healing wounds as if they held answers she was still learning to read. Because running alone is just slow dying. I needed, she paused, searching for words. I needed to believe there was someone in this world who'd choose to help rather than hurt. You were the only person I could think of who'd already made that choice once. The weight of her faith pressed on Jacob like a physical thing. I'm not a good man. Maybe not, but you're trying to be. That's more than most can say. The third day began before dawn, all three of them moving through darkness by starlight and instinct. The village lay ahead, still hours distant, but pursuit felt close enough to taste. Jacob couldn't say what warned him. No sound, no visible sign, just the prickling awareness that had kept him alive through 2 wars. They're close. Dakota nodded without breaking stride. Half a day behind, maybe less. The pace increased to the edge of what their bodies could sustain. Jacob's lungs burned, his heart hammering against ribs that felt suddenly fragile. Ayana stumbled more frequently, catching herself on rocks and continuing before anyone could offer help. Pride and fear drove them forward in equal measure. The village revealed itself gradually, structures emerging from the landscape as if they'd grown there rather than been built by human hands. Adobe and stone, perhaps 40 dwellings, smoke rising from morning fires. Children's voices carried on the wind, high and clear. A sound Jacob hadn't heard in so long it seemed foreign. People emerged from doorways as they approached, eyes narrowing at the sight of 3 travelers. The children fell silent. Women pulled them close. Men reached for weapons kept within easy reach. A young warrior stepped forward, maybe 29, lean and hard with eyes that burned with barely contained fury. He carried a rifle with the casual competence of someone who knew how to use it. When he spoke, his voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Dakota, why do you bring the butcher here? Jacob's hand moved toward his revolver before conscious thought caught up. Dakota's grip on his arm was surprisingly strong, stopping the motion before it completed. Peace, Wens. The warrior, Neshoba, Dakota murmured, aimed his rifle at Jacob's chest. This man led soldiers to Red Cliff. My aunt died there, my cousins. Why isn't he dead? Ayana moved to place herself between the rifle and Jacob, her thin body no shield at all but her courage absolute. Because he saved my life, and I claim right of protection. Neshoba's lip curled. You claim right? You who abandoned the people? The accusation hit visible, Ayana's body flinching as if struck. I didn't abandon. I was driven out by men like you who blamed a child for surviving. Murmurs rippled through the gathering crowd, voices overlapping in Apache too rapid for Jacob to follow. An older man emerged from the largest dwelling, his face bearing scars that mapped a lifetime of violence survived. He walked with authority that needed no announcement, silence spreading in his wake. Enough. His voice carried the kind of command that came from leading people through times when leadership meant the difference between survival and extinction. Dakota is elder. He brings guests. We hear them. The man turned to Jacob, dark eyes assessing with a calculation that missed nothing. You, white man, you will speak. Truth only. Lies here die quickly. They arranged themselves in a circle, the traditional council formation that gave everyone equal voice. 5 elders sat with Karuk, the scarred leader, at the head. Dakota took his place among them, leaving Jacob and Ayana standing in the center like defendants awaiting judgment. Jacob removed his hat, a gesture of respect he'd learned meant something in Apache culture. He stood straight despite his exhausted body, meeting the eyes of men and women who had every reason to kill him. My name is Jacob Sterling. I was the scout who led cavalry to Red Cliff Canyon 17 years ago. I did this. I don't deny it. The admission settled over the circle like snow, cold and heavy. No one moved. I was told by a man named Clayton Wade that Red Cliff held hostile warriors, weapons, plans to attack settlements. I believed him. I was wrong. The words came easier now, truth spoken aloud for the first time to people who'd earned the right to hear it. I led soldiers to families, elders, children. 23 died. An elder woman spat into the dirt, the gesture eloquent in its contempt. I saved 4 people that night, including this woman. It doesn't erase what I did. Nothing can. But I'm here now because Clayton Wade is hunting her. He's the one who lied. He's the one who wanted your land for the gold beneath it. And I'm asking, begging for your help to stop him. Why should we trust you?" The question came from Karuk, his scarred face revealing nothing of his thoughts. "You shouldn't." Jacob forced himself to hold the man's gaze. "But trust her. She walked across desert to find me. She believes I can help. Maybe she's wrong, but I'm willing to die trying to prove her right." The elders conferred in Apache, voices low and urgent. Minutes stretched while Jacob stood under their scrutiny, feeling the weight of judgment he'd avoided for 17 years. Ayana remained beside him, her presence both comfort and reminder of stakes higher than his own survival. Karuk finally spoke, each word deliberate. "You may stay. For now, you work, you earn food. You sleep outside village, armed guard always. If you betray us, you die. Understood?" Understood. The dismissal was clear. Jacob and Ayana were led to the village edge where a crude shelter offered minimal protection from elements. A young warrior, not Neshoba, someone quieter, took position nearby with a rifle across his knees, making their prisoner status obvious. They collapsed onto hard ground, too exhausted to care about comfort. Ayana was asleep within minutes, her body claiming the rest it desperately needed. Jacob remained awake, watching the village go about its business, feeling the eyes that tracked his every movement. Dakota appeared as evening approached, bringing food and blankets. The old man said nothing, simply leaving the supplies and departing. But the gesture spoke volumes. Jacob had been heard. The rest was up to him. The first month passed in endless labor. Jacob woke before dawn and worked until darkness made continued effort dangerous. He repaired fences, dug irrigation channels, chopped wood until his hands bled and calloused over. Every task was meant to test him, to break him, to prove he was as useless as they believed. He finished at every job. His body screamed protest. Old injuries flared with renewed viciousness. He'd wake in darkness, joints so stiff he could barely stand, muscles cramping from overuse. But he'd stand anyway, force movement into frozen limbs, and present himself for whatever work the day demanded. The younger men watched, some with open contempt, others with curiosity they tried to hide. Neshoba remained hostile, finding reasons to assign the hardest tasks, the heaviest loads. Jacob accepted each assignment without complaint, working until his vision blurred and his lungs burned, then working some more. Old man can barely lift an axe. The mockery drifted across the worksite, intended to be overheard. Jacob said nothing, just kept swinging, each strike driving the blade deeper until the log split clean. He'd learned in Vietnam that responding to taunts gave them power. Silence and persistence answered better than words ever could. Ayana integrated more smoothly, her Apache heritage opening doors Jacobs would never approach. She taught children, helped women with cooking and weaving, slowly reclaiming the culture Excel had stolen. But she kept distance from Jacob, aware that association with the butcher of Red Cliff would taint her own acceptance. They spoke in passing, brief exchanges when paths crossed. "How are you? Surviving?" "You, same." The conversations meant more than their sparse words suggested, small confirmations that neither was alone, even when surrounded by people who wished one of them had never been born. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Neshoba's younger brother, 12 years old, all gangly limbs and bravado, fell from a horse during breaking practice. The crack of bone breaking carried across the village, followed by screaming that didn't stop. Jacob reached the boy before conscious thought intervened. His field medic training from Vietnam took over, hands moving with practiced certainty. The break was bad, compound fracture with bone threatening to pierce skin. Without treatment, infection would take the arm within days. Neshoba shoved him back. "Don't touch him." The boy's screaming intensified, his young face gray with shock and pain. Kurok appeared, taking in the situation with one assessing glance. "Let him try. Boy will lose the arm otherwise." Permission granted, Jacob moved quickly. He'd set bones in worse conditions, working in jungle mud with artillery falling close enough to shake the earth. His hands remembered the angles, the pressure needed, the way to manipulate broken ends back into alignment. The boy screamed once more, a sound that would haunt Jacob's dreams, then passed out from the pain. He worked quickly, fashioning a splint from straight branches, padding it with torn cloth, securing everything with leather strips. When the boy woke, Jacob had whiskey ready, just a few drops to dull the worst edge of agony. "You're brave, braver than soldiers I knew." The words came without thinking, but they were true. This child had endured what grown men couldn't face. Over the following weeks, the bone healed straight. The boy regained full use of his arm, no infection, no permanent damage. Neshoba never thanked Jacob directly, but the hostility lessened, replaced by something that might eventually become grudging respect. The second month brought subtle changes. People stopped turning away when Jacob approached. Children no longer fled at his presence. An elder woman left food outside his shelter one evening, saying nothing but making her meaning clear. He'd proven himself worthy of sustenance, if not yet trust. Dakota taught him Apache words and phrases, basic vocabulary that opened small doors of communication. Jacob struggled with the pronunciation. His tongue, clumsy around sounds English had never prepared him for. "I'm too old to learn new languages." Dakota's response carried gentle mockery. "You learned Vietnamese in the war, didn't you? That was 30 years ago. Then you have practice being old and learning." The lessons continued, sometimes with Ayana joining when her duties allowed. She'd correct his pronunciation with patient amusement, repeating words until his ear learned to distinguish subtle differences. In these moments, the walls between them lowered, and Jacob glimpsed the woman she might have become without Red Cliff's shadow between them. The third month brought Maria de Delgado. She arrived on a wagon loaded with trade goods, her weathered face and capable hands speaking of someone who'd learned survival in the same hard school that had taught Jacob. 52 years old, Mexican, widow written in the set of her shoulders and the careful way she moved through the world. She saw Jacob and recognition flared in her eyes. Sterling? Jacob Sterling. Wariness clamped around his chest. Who's asking? Someone who lost her husband to Clayton Wade. Maria's voice carried weight earned through grief survived. He burned our ranch 3 years ago. My husband tried to fight. They shot him, called it self-defense. They studied each other across the village square, two people carrying their dead like physical weights. I heard rumors you were here. Couldn't believe it. The scout from Red Cliff living with Apache? Not living with, living near. They tolerate me, more than most white men get. You must have earned it, still earning. Maria began visiting regularly, bringing supplies the village needed, trading fairly when others would have exploited their isolation. She and Jacob fell into conversation during these visits, discovering common ground in loss and the hard wisdom that came from surviving what should have killed them. You planning to stop Clayton? Planning to try. I'd like to help. She met his eyes with the directness of someone who'd stopped hiding behind social niceties. I know his operation. I know his men, and I know his weakness. What's that? Pride. He thinks he's untouchable. We can use that. Something shifted in those conversations, connection forming between two people who'd learned that sometimes survival meant accepting help rather than facing everything alone. Maria brought intelligence about Clayton's movements, his hiring of additional men, the whispers of something large being planned, and she brought something else Jacob hadn't expected. The reminder that companionship existed outside isolation's safe walls. They sat together one evening at the village edge, watching sunset paint the desert in impossible colors. You're scared, terrified. I'm too old for this, but you're doing it anyway. Someone has to. Might as well be me. I've got less to lose than most. Is that true? Nothing to lose? Jacob met her eyes, seeing understanding there that came from walking similar paths. I had nothing 3 months ago. Now, I'm not sure. What changed? I remembered what it feels like to be part of something, to have people who don't hate me. Maria touched his hand, first physical contact between them, brief but electric. For what it's worth, I don't hate you. I think you're a stubborn, guilt-ridden old fool. But I don't hate you. You always this charming, only with men I like. The moment stretched, neither pulling away, both aware of stepping towards something that might become more if they survived what was coming. Maria, I'm 54. I know. I'm 52. We're both too old to play games, but maybe we're the right age to be honest. After this is done, if I survive, maybe we could talk more. I'd like that. Maria's intelligence about Clayton painted a troubling picture. 10 men now, maybe more, heavily armed and moving through the territory with impunity that came from buying local law. They were searching systematically, questioning anyone who might have seen a young Apache woman traveling alone. He's getting desperate. That makes him dangerous. The war council gathered in Karuk's dwelling, smoke from the central fire curling toward the roof opening. Jacob sat outside the circle, present but not included. While the leaders debated in Apache too rapid for his limited vocabulary to follow. Kuruk finally switched to English, acknowledging Jacob's presence even if not his participation. We could send word to federal marshals. Let law handle it. Maria shook her head. Clayton owns local law. Federal marshals take months. We don't have months. Neshoba spoke up, his young voice carrying the certainty of someone who'd never faced the true cost of violence. We fight, hit his camp, kill them all, and become the hostiles they always said we were? Dakota's question landed with the weight of experience, speaking to inexperience. Give them excuse for another Redcliffe? Jacob found himself speaking before conscious thought approved the words. We don't need to kill everyone. We need to expose him. Get him to confess. Neshoba's laugh held no humor. He'll never confess. Not willingly. But a desperate man makes mistakes. We make him desperate. The planning stretched through the night, voices rising and falling as strategies were proposed, examined, discarded. Maria revealed Clayton's pattern. He'd be personally overseeing a gold shipment next week, $50,000 worth, too much to subordinates. We take the shipment, publicly, make sure everyone knows. And then, Karuk's scarred face revealed nothing of his thoughts. Then Clayton comes after us. Angry, reckless, we'll be ready with witnesses, record his confession, give it to federal marshals. Risky, very risky. Jacob met the war chief's eyes. I'm 54 years old. Everything's risky at this age. The planning continued, details hammered out through debate and compromise. 7 people for the raid, Jacob, Karuk, Neshoba, Maria, and 3 other warriors whose names Jacob had learned during his months of labor. Ayana insisted on participating, her voice carrying authority she'd earned through her own survival. I'm coming. No, the word came automatically, instinct to protect overriding tactical sense. You don't give me orders. Her eyes blazed with determination that reminded Jacob why she'd survived 3 months running from Clayton. I have right to face my tormentor. They stared at each other, wills clashing until Jacob recognized the futility of arguing. You stay back. Sniper position. You don't engage directly. Acceptable. The week of preparation felt simultaneously endless and too brief. They cleaned weapons, rehearsed the plan until everyone knew their role, scouted routes and fallback positions. Jacob taught tactical movement to warriors who'd learned their own forms of combat, finding common ground between Army doctrine and Apache wisdom. Neshoba approached him on the final evening, grudging respect finally surfacing in his expression. You know your shit, old man. I should. Been doing it since before you were born. If we survive this, I'll call you friend. Let's survive first. Details later. Jacob found Maria by the communal fire, her hands busy with last preparations that didn't really need doing. Nervous energy, the kind that came before violence when the mind needed occupation to avoid contemplating mortality. She brought coffee, sitting beside him in companionable silence. They'd learned the value of quiet together, discovering that sometimes the best conversations happened without words. You ready? As I'll ever be. If you don't come back, I'll come back. He couldn't promise survival, but he could promise intent. I have reasons now. That's more than I had 3 months ago. Maria leaned against his shoulder, a gesture of intimacy earned through shared experience rather than passion. We're too old for grand romance. Maybe, but we're the right age for truth. And the truth is, these past weeks with you have reminded me what hope feels like. Then don't waste it by dying. They sat together as stars emerged, 2 people who'd survived more than they should have, finding comfort in proximity and the understanding that some connections didn't require youth's intensity to carry profound meaning. Dawn came too quickly. 7 riders prepared to leave, their faces set with the grim determination of people who'd accepted necessary risk. Ayana took position on the ridge with a rifle, her thin silhouette sharp against the morning sky. The village watched in silence. Children held close by mothers who remembered what happened when violence came calling. Dakota approached Jacob, his weathered face solemn. You ready, old friend? As I'll ever be. If you die today, know this, you've earned forgiveness. From me, from many here, maybe even from yourself. The words lodged in Jacob's chest, precious and painful in equal measure. That means a lot, old man. Then don't waste it by getting killed. Jacob mounted his horse, feeling every one of his 54 years in the effort. Around him, the others did the same. Weapons secured, faces showing the calm that came before violence began. They rode out as the sun cleared the eastern ridge. 7 people moving toward confrontation that would determine whether redemption was possible or just another lie men told themselves to justify continuing. The canyon pass narrowed to barely 20 feet across, walls rising sheer on both sides. Perfect ambush terrain, the kind Jacob had learned to recognize in Vietnam before the word ambush meant anything more than tactical advantage. He positioned himself behind a boulder cluster on the north side, rifle loaded and ready, his aging knees protesting the crouch but holding steady. Kuruk settled in beside him, movements economical and silent. The war chief's scarred face revealed nothing, but his hands checked his weapons with the practiced ease of someone who'd survived by being thorough. You good? The question emerged barely above breath. Jacob nodded, and feeling sweat already beading despite the morning coolness. Been better, been worse. Across the narrow passage, Neshoba and 2 other warriors took position among rocks that would give them clear fields of fire. Maria waited further back with a wagon positioned to block retreat, her shotgun resting across her lap like she'd been born holding it. And on the ridge 300 yards distant, Ayana settled into shooting position, her silhouette small but steady against the lightning sky. The weight stretched nerves tight. Jacob's knee began to ache, that special sharp pain that came from holding position too long. But moving meant noise, and noise meant losing the advantage of surprise. He breathed through it, counting seconds, listening for the sound of wagon wheels that would signal their target's approach. Kuruk touched his arm, pointed. Dust rising in the distance, still too far to see clearly but coming their direction. The gold shipment, right on schedule according to Maria's intelligence. 2 drivers, 4 guards, maybe more hidden in the wagon bed. Jacob's heart rate increased despite his attempts at control. Combat did this, flooded the body with chemicals meant to sharpen reaction time, but that mostly just made hands shake and thoughts race. He forced himself to breathe slowly, deeply, pulling air into lungs that wanted to hyperventilate. The wagon resolved from dust and distance, moving at the careful pace of men transporting shows something valuable. 6 men visible now, 2 on the driver's bench, 4 riding alongside with rifles held ready. Professional security, alert, incompetent. This wouldn't be easy. Neshoba's warriors shifted slightly, ready to move on, signal. Maria urged her horse forward, positioning the wagon across the trail ahead, creating an obstacle that would force the gold shipment to stop or risk collision. The trap was set. The lead guard saw Maria's blockade and raised his hand, halting the convoy 20 yards from the narrows. His eyes scanned the canyon walls with the wariness of someone who understood terrain and its dangers. Jacob stood slowly, rifle aimed but not threatening immediate violence. 7 more weapons appeared from concealment, surrounding the wagon in overlapping fields of fire that left no room for heroic resistance. Nobody has to die today. His voice carried across the distance, steady despite the adrenaline singing through his veins. Just leave the wagon. The lead guard's face twisted with recognition. Sterling, you're alive? Disappointed. The guard, Garrett, Maria had named him, Clayton's lieutenant and right hand for violence, assessed the situation with calculating eyes. He counted visible weapons, measured distances, calculated odds that came up bad no matter how he arranged them. Clayton will hunt you to the ends of the earth. I'm counting on it. Now drop your weapons. The standoff held, tension building like pressure before a storm breaks. Garrett's hand twitched toward his rifle, and Ayana's shot kicked up dust 6 inches from his boot, precision that spoke louder than threats. The message was clear. The next shot wouldn't miss. One of the other guards reached for his pistol with the stupid courage of men too young to understand mortality. Ayana's second shot took the weapon from his hand, metal flying in a spray of blood and fragments. The man screamed, clutching his ruined fingers, and the sound broke whatever resolve the others had maintained. Weapons hit the ground in rapid succession. Neshoba and his warriors emerged from cover, securing the prisoners with efficient movements that suggested this wasn't their first ambush. Kuruk checked the wagon, pulling back canvas to reveal sacks marked with assayers' stamps, dust, and coins that represented months of labor stolen from land that had never belonged to Clayton Wade. 50,000, easy. The war chief's voice carried satisfaction. This will hurt him. Jacob approached Garrett, studying the man's face for information beyond anger. Tell Clayton where to find me. Apache Village in Red Canyon. Tell him I'll be waiting. You're making a mistake. Wouldn't be my first. They released the guards on foot, confiscating horses and weapons, leaving them to walk back to Clayton with the message that his empire was no longer untouchable. Garrett limped away, nursing his pride and probably planning revenge, but alive to deliver the warning Jacob wanted delivered. The wagon rolled toward the village under heavy guard, its contents representing leverage and target in equal measure. Clayton would come. The only questions were when and with how many men. 3 days passed in feverish preparation. They fortified the village entrance with stone barricades that would funnel attackers into kill zones. Sharpshooters took positions on the canyon walls, covering approaches from elevation that turned geography into ally. Women and children evacuated to deeper caves, carrying supplies for a siege that might last days. Jacob worked alongside men who 3 months earlier had wanted him dead, his hands blistering as he stacked rocks and built defenses. His body screamed protest at the pace, old injuries flaring with renewed malice. But he pushed through because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant acknowledging the very real possibility that none of them would survive what was coming. Neshoba positioned himself nearby during a water break, his young face set with determination that made him look older than his years. If we survive this, Sterling, I'll call you friend. Let's survive first. Details later. The young warrior's almost smile suggested he was learning to appreciate Jacob's pragmatism. You think we can stop him? Really, I think we can try. That's all anyone can do. Maria arrived from her trading post, bringing more ammunition and a device Jacob hadn't seen in years, a wax cylinder recorder. Old technology but functional. Her eyes met his across the compound, question and promise tangled together. For the confession. If you can get close enough, Jacob took the recorder, feeling its weight both physical and symbolic. Getting close to Clayton Wade meant putting himself in range of a man who'd orchestrated one massacre and wouldn't hesitate to order another. But getting the confession recorded, getting proof that could stand up in federal court, meant justice instead of just revenge. The plan formed through hours of debate and revision. Jacob would meet Clayton under flag of truce, draw him into conversation, get him talking while Maria hid close enough to record. Risky, bordering on suicidal, but better than alternatives that involved pitched battle against superior numbers. Dakota found him the evening before Clayton was expected to arrive. The old Apache's face grave in firelight. You really would have done it, wouldn't you? Put a bullet in your head after Redcliffe. Yes. What stopped you? Really? The question deserved honest answer. The thought that she might remember me. That somewhere, that little girl I carried through the fire might grow up and think, even once, that someone had tried. I couldn't take that away from her by dying. And now she's back. Now she's back. And this time I won't let her down. They sat in silence, two old men contemplating mortality, with the clarity that came from having survived longer than probability suggested they should. Tomorrow would bring violence regardless of anyone's best intentions. The only variable was who would be standing when it ended. You've earned forgiveness, you know, from me, from many here. Maybe it's time you forgave yourself. I don't know how. Dakota's weathered hand gripped Jacob's shoulder. You start by living like you deserve to live, by building instead of destroying, by teaching the young that mistakes don't define us. How we respond to them does. The words settled into Jacob's chest, taking root in soil that had been barren for 17 years. He didn't know if redemption was truly possible, didn't know if any amount of good could balance scales weighted with 23 dead. But he knew that trying was better than the alternative. That choosing to stand with the vulnerable instead of hiding from consequences was the only path forward worth walking. Clayton arrived with the sun at zenith, 15 riders spread in a loose formation that spoke of military training and tactical awareness. They stopped 100 yards from the village entrance, too far for accurate rifle fire but close enough to make their presence felt. Clayton Wade sat his horse with the casual authority of someone accustomed to power. His 58 years weathered into his face, but his bearing still strong. He'd aged since Jacob last saw him, gray threading his hair and lines deepening around his eyes. But the intelligence in his gaze remained sharp. A white cloth fluttered from a pole, the universal symbol for parley. Jacob walked out alone, aware of rifles tracking his movement from both sides, aware that this moment balanced on the edge of violence that could erupt with single word or gesture gone wrong. They stopped 10 feet apart. Two men who'd once worked together to commit atrocity, neither could undo. Clayton's eyes tracked over Jacob's face, cataloging changes time had wrought. Sterling, you look old. So do you. Time catches all of us. I see you've made friends with the savages. How touching. The slur landed deliberately, testing for reaction. Jacob forced himself to remain calm, aware that losing his temper meant losing control of the conversation. They're more civilized than most white men I've known, including you. Clayton's smile held no warmth. I want my gold back. No, that gold is blood money. It's going to rebuild what you destroyed. Redcliffe? That was 17 years ago. Let it go. You want me to let go? Jacob felt Maria positioning herself behind rocks 30 feet away, the recorder ready. You orchestrated the murder of 23 people for profit. I did what was necessary. Clayton's voice carried the certainty of someone who'd justified his actions so many times that justification had become truth. My daughter was dying. And did the gold save her? The question landed like a physical blow. Clayton's face hardened, something breaking behind his eyes. No, she died anyway. But that doesn't make me wrong. It makes you tragic. But it also makes you a murderer. We're both murderers, Sterling. You pulled triggers that night too. I did. Because I trusted your intelligence. You lied. You knew it was families. I suspected. I didn't know for certain. Bullshit. You knew. Admit it. The silence stretched, Clayton's internal struggle playing across his features. Finally, he laughed, a sound empty of humor. Fine. Yes, I knew. I gave false reports, told the colonel they were hostiles. I needed that land. The Apache wouldn't sell. So I made them go away. Maria's recorder whirred quietly, capturing every word. Why? Just for money? For meaning? Clayton's composure cracked, years of buried guilt surfacing despite his attempts at control. Don't you understand? My daughter died. My wife killed herself because of what I'd done. I needed it to mean something. The gold, the empire, all of it. I needed Sarah's death to have purpose. Sarah's death has no purpose. Jacob's voice softened, recognizing the broken man beneath Clayton's armor. Neither does your wife's. Death doesn't have purpose. Life does. And you wasted yours chasing ghosts. At least I have an empire. What do you have? A guilty conscience and a handful of Indians who tolerate you? I have something you'll never have. A chance to be better tomorrow than I was yesterday. Clayton's hand moved toward his pistol, the motion casual but deliberate. You think you're redeemed? You think saving one girl erases 23 dead? No, nothing erases that. But I'm trying to build something new. You're just digging the same grave deeper. The pistol cleared leather aimed at Jacob's head. Maybe killing you will give me peace. Go ahead. Jacob didn't flinch, meeting Clayton's eyes with the calm of someone who'd made peace with mortality. But it won't bring them back, won't give you what you're looking for. Clayton's hand trembled, finger on the trigger, the weight of all his choices pressing down. Maybe not, but it'll give me satisfaction. The moment held, balanced on the edge of violence, and Jacob saw in Clayton's face the reflection of his own 17 years of guilt and self-recrimination. They were mirrors of each other, two men who'd trusted the wrong information and led to death. The only difference being how they'd chosen to carry that weight forward. I'm tired of running. The confession emerged quiet but absolute. I'm tired of guilt. If you need to kill me to feel better, do it. But it won't change who you are. Clayton lowered the pistol slightly, his expression shifting to something that might have been pleading. I wanted you to understand why I did it. I needed you to know I'm not a monster. You're not. You're a man who made terrible choices. Like me, Brown. Difference is I'm trying to make different choices now. It's too late for me. It's never too late. Put the gun down, face trial, tell the truth. Maybe you'll find the pistol raised again, aimed past Jacob toward the village, toward where Ayana waited on the ridge. I can't. I won't. If I can't have peace, neither can you. The shot rang out before Jacob could react, Clayton's aim shifting at the last second. Jacob tackled him, both men going down in a tangle of limbs in desperation. The pistol fired again, bullet kicking up dirt, and then Neshoba was there, having sprinted from his position, throwing himself at Clayton with the reckless courage of youth. Clayton twisted, knife appearing from somewhere, and drove it into Neshoba's chest with brutal efficiency. The young warrior gasped, shock and pain warring on his face, but his momentum carried them both down. His hands found Clayton's throat, squeezing with dying strength. Jacob scrambled for the dropped pistol, his old body moving too slowly, everything happening in the compressed time of combat where seconds stretched like hours. Clayton threw Neshoba off, the young Apache's blood bright on his hands, and reached for his own weapon. Ayana's rifle cracked from the ridge. The bullet took Clayton in the shoulder, spinning him, and Jacob finally had the pistol in his grip. He fired once, the shot hitting Clayton's chest, dropping him. The older man fell to his knees, blood spreading across his shirt in a dark stain. His eyes found Jacob's, filled with something that might have been relief. You won. Enjoy your redemption. There's no winning here. Jacob knelt beside him, watching life fade, just less losing. Clayton's laugh turned into a cough, blood flecking his lips. Tell her, tell Sarah's mother, I'm sorry. He died before Jacob could respond. Whatever peace he'd been seeking forever out of reach. Jacob turned to Neshoba, knowing what he'd find, but hoping anyway. The young warrior lay on his back, blood pooling beneath him, his breathing shallow and rapid. Jacob pressed his hands to the wound, but there was too much damage, too many vital things cut. Why? Why did you save me? Neshoba's eyes focused with effort. Because you're trying. That's enough. Hang on. We'll get help. No, his hand gripped Jacob's with surprising strength. This is good death. Honorable. Tell your brother I was brave. You were. You are. The tears came unbidden. Grief for this young man who'd hated him and then saved him. Bravest man I've known. You too, old man. The light left his eyes, that ineffable spark that separated living from gone. Jacob knelt there, holding the hand of someone who'd become friend in the space between breaths, feeling the weight of another death that would join the 23 who haunted his dreams. Kuruk arrived, taking in the scene with one comprehensive glance. His scarred face revealed nothing, but his hand on Jacob's shoulder spoke volumes. We have him. In the recording. Maria emerged from concealment, the wax cylinder clutched like sacred relic. Federal marshals can hear this. Clayton's confession, his admission of orchestrating Redcliffe. Riders appeared on the horizon, official markers identifying them as U.S. Marshals. Maria had sent word days ago, timing everything so that justice would arrive in time to matter. Clayton's remaining men surrendered without fight, their loyalty purchased for money that would stop flowing with their employer's death. The village gathered around Neshoba's body, grief settling over them like physical weight. His younger brother, arm healed straight thanks to Jacob's medical skills, knelt beside him, tears streaming down his young face. The women began keening, high and terrible, a sound that carried across the desert and seemed to make the very stones weep. They prepared the body according to Apache tradition, washing and wrapping, carrying him to a shallow cave that would protect his rest. Dakota led the prayers, his aged voice strong despite the grief that shadowed every word. Jacob spoke when silence fell, his throat tight with emotion. I didn't know Neshoba long, but he taught me that courage isn't absence of fear. It's doing the right thing despite it. He hated me, had every reason to, but when it mattered, he saved me. I'll carry that gift the rest of my life. He placed his rifle in the grave, the weapon that had seen him through 2 wars and 17 years of penance. For the warrior. The community touched his shoulder as they passed, one after another, gestures of acceptance that came too late for Neshoba to witness, but that he'd made possible through sacrifice. 4 other Apache had died in the brief battle, older warriors who'd chosen to stand against Clayton's hired guns. Their graves received the same honors, the same grief, the same promise that their deaths would mean something. News reached them weeks later. Federal marshals had taken Maria's wax cylinder recording to Santa Fe, where Clayton Wade's confession was entered into official record. Though the man himself had died in the desert confrontation, his recorded admission of orchestra was played before a federal judge and territorial officials. The remaining members of Clayton's operation, 6 men who'd surrendered when their leader fell, were tried using the evidence from the recording. 3 received lengthy prison sentences for their roles in human trafficking and conspiracy. The others, including Garrett, accepted plea agreements in exchange for testimony that helped federal authorities dismantle what remained of Clayton's criminal network. More importantly, the recording cleared Jacob Sterling's name in official military records. The Army issued a posthumous correction to the Red Cliff Canyon incident report, noting that Scout Sterling had acted on falsified intelligence provided by civilian contractor Clayton Wade. It wasn't an apology, the Army didn't apologize, but it was acknowledgement. Jacob felt nothing when Maria brought the news. No satisfaction, no sense of closure, just the same hollow emptiness that had lived in his chest since Red Cliff. The official correction meant something to Maria, to the village, to history, but it couldn't resurrect the 23 dead or ease the weight Jacob would carry until his own death released him. You thought it would feel different. Dakota's observation came as they sat together overlooking the village, watching children play in afternoon light. The old Apache understood emptiness, had carried his own for years. Yes, that's because vengeance is empty. But justice lets us move forward. 6 months later, the village had settled into rhythms that incorporated loss without being defined by it. Jacob moved through days with purpose that came from being needed rather than tolerated. He taught tracking to young men who would use the skills for hunting, not war. He helped repair structures, tend crops, build the infrastructure that turned survival into thriving. Maria visited weekly, her trading trips providing excuse for time spent in company that had evolved beyond alliance into something that felt like partnership. They married in a quiet ceremony that mixed Apache tradition with Catholic ritual, 2 people choosing companionship in full knowledge of each other's damage. You happy? The question came as they sat together watching sunset paint impossible colors across the desert. Jacob considered it seriously, knowing Maria deserved honest answer. I don't know if I deserve happy, but content, peaceful. That's enough. It's more than enough. Ayana had found her place teaching children, keeping Apache language and traditions alive in faces that represented the future. A young warrior from a neighboring tribe had begun courting her with the patient persistence of someone who recognized worth. When she asked Jacob's blessing, he gave it with the knowledge that she'd become more than the child he'd saved. She'd become the woman who'd saved him in return. 10 years passed in the way time does when life finds meaning beyond mere survival. Jacob turned 64, his hair fully white now, his body requiring a cane for the distances he'd once walked without thought. But his eyes remained sharp and his mind sharper. The wisdom of accumulated years finally finding outlet in teaching rather than mourning. The village had grown to 60 families, a mix of Apache, Mexican, and a few white families who'd learned that respect opened doors prejudice couldn't. The school Ayana ran educated children in 3 languages, preparing them for a world that would require navigating multiple cultures. The trading post Maria managed had become regional hub, a place where honest dealing trumped exploitation. Jacob spent mornings with the young, teaching skills that seemed simple but carried complexity, reading tracks, understanding weather patterns, finding water in places that seemed barren. His lessons went beyond practical knowledge into philosophy earned through hard experience. One boy, maybe 13, asked the question Jacob had been waiting for. Is it true you were at Red Cliff, that you killed Apache? He'd learned that lying to children dishonored them in the truth. Yes, it's true. I made terrible mistakes. hurt people who didn't deserve it. But you're Apache now. How? I'm not Apache. I'm a guest who was given grace. Your people taught me that redemption is possible, but it's not given. It's earned. Every single day. How do you earn it? By trying to be better than you were. By helping instead of hurting. By building instead of destroying. By teaching the next generation not to repeat your... Dakota's death came peacefully in his 88th year, the old warrior simply not waking one morning from sleep. Jacob sat with the body, remembering conversations and silences shared, feeling the loss of someone who'd seen him at his worst and chosen to believe in the possibility of better. At the funeral, Jacob spoke words that felt inadequate for the debt he owed. He saved my life, not by pulling me from fire, by showing me how to live afterward, by believing I could be more than my worst mistakes, by giving me purpose when I thought there was none left. The seasons continued their endless cycle. Jacob's body slowed, but his spirit found peace in the rhythms of community, in watching children grow, and teaching them what he'd learned through suffering. Maria aged beside him, their partnership built on understanding that transcended passion, rooted in the shared knowledge that second chances were precious gifts not to be squandered. One evening, surrounded by grandchildren who weren't his by blood, but were his by choice, Maria asked the question she'd asked many times before. Any regrets? Thousands. But also gratitude. For second chances. For forgiveness I didn't deserve. For you, how much time you think we have left? Don't know. Don't care. However much it is, I'll spend it here. With you. With them. The community gathered for evening meal, laughter and conversation mixing with the smell of cooking fires. Children played while elders told stories. Young couples walked hand in hand while babies slept in their mother's arms. Life continuing in all its messy, beautiful complexity. Jacob and Maria joined them, their steps slow but steady, supported by each other and by the community they had helped build. In this moment, surrounded by people who'd chosen to see possibility rather than just past, Jacob understood that redemption wasn't a destination, but a direction. Not something achieved, but something lived, day after day, choice after choice. The accumulated weight of better decisions slowly balancing scales that would never truly be, even but that could, perhaps, find their own kind of equilibrium. The sun set over Broken Mesa, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson, beautiful enough to make the heart ache. Jacob watched it sink below the horizon, feeling the peace that came from knowing he'd done what he could with the time he'd been given. He'd carried the weight of Red Cliff for 17 years, would carry it until death released him. But he'd also carried forward, built something worth building, taught something worth teaching, loved and been loved in return. That had to be enough. It was all any man could do.